The reason so many people misunderstand so many issues is not that these issues are so complex, but that people do not want a factual or analytical explanation that leaves them emotionally unsatisfied. They want villains to hate and heroes to cheer, and they don't want explanations that do not give them that. Welcome to Keith Knight Don't Tread on Anyone. I want to summarize The Three Languages of Politics, Talking Across the Political Divides by Arnold Kling. He starts with an opening question. An individual will make a point that seems totally convincing to the people who agree with him or her. And yet, the point leaves those who disagree unaffected. How can this be? Well, he says there are three languages of politics: the progressive, conservative, and libertarian. I call this the three axes model of political communication. A progressive will communicate along the oppressor-oppressed axis, framing issues in terms of the P dichotomy. A conservative will communicate along the civilization-barbarism axis, framing issues in terms of the C dichotomy. A libertarian will communicate along the liberty-coercion axis, framing issues in terms of the L dichotomy. To get into the mindset of the people using these languages, he says who their heroes tend to be and who they generally see as more or less the villains in their worldview. A progressive would generally say something like, "My heroes are people who have stood up for the underprivileged. The people I cannot stand are the people who are indifferent to the oppression of women, minorities, and the poor." A conservative would say, "My heroes are people who have stood up for Western values. The people I cannot stand are the people who are indifferent to the assault on the moral virtues and traditions that are the foundation of our civilization." The libertarian might say, "My heroes are people who have stood up for individual rights. The people I cannot stand are the people who are indifferent to government taking away people's ability to make their own choices." He goes on, "What I am saying is that when we communicate about issues, we tend to fall back on one of three axes. By doing so, we engage in political tribalism. We signal to members of our tribe that we agree with them, and we enhance our status in the tribe." In other words, unfortunately, there's a very big incentive for people to speak their own language, and there's not much of an incentive to try and reach across the aisle. What learning the other languages can do is enable you to understand how others think about political issues. I believe that the three languages of politics are used as part of fast political thinking. The main prescriptive theme of this book is that you should hesitate when you find yourself inclined to frame an issue in terms of your preferred political language. Instead, try to switch over to slow political thinking. He summarizes his general points. Point number one, I propose that the three dominant moral frames, oppressor-oppressed, civilization-barbarism, and liberty-coercion, are useful in a descriptive sense. I call this the three-axis model. Those moral frames do not necessarily describe how people arrive at their opinions. However, these frames do predict the language that people are likely to use in political communications. Number two, I am not saying that the ideologies of progressivism, conservatism, and libertarianism can be boiled down to just these three moral frames. Each of those ideological tendencies is in fact complex and multifaceted. Number three, turning from the descriptive to the prescriptive, I believe that linguistic differences and negative stereotypes are dangerous. Politically aware Americans use those frames to assert moral superiority. They take it for granted that once an issue has been framed in their preferred way, it is settled. I believe that each of us can reason more constructively and deliberate more effectively across political tribes if we recognize that we tend to be overly attuned to our preferred language. We can reduce our level of political anger by better understanding the other languages. While listening to another language, you can still carry the belief that you are right, and you do not need to split differences or compromise. However, you should be less inclined to demonize people who speak different political languages. Thank you for watching Keith Knight. Don't tread on anyone.